is given to all who obey. Now have faith. Now have courage. Says the Lord, I am with you. My spirit abides with you. Now have faith. Now have courage. I will fill it with glory. Build the church. Build the temple of God. Have we built our homes? Have we planted our fields and forgotten the temple of God? Sound the word to all children. We are His chosen remnant, calling to people abroad. Now have faith. Now have courage. Says the Lord, I am with you. My spirit abides with you. Now have faith. Now have courage. I will fill it with glory. Build the church. Build the temple of God. Let us gather wood from the mountains of truth, hammer faith, hammer hope, hammer love. When a soul is saved, what a sight as Jehovah fills the church Before the throne of God above, I have a song of perfect glee, a great high priest whose name is love, who ever lives and pleads for me. My name is graven on his hands, my name is written on his heart. I know that while in heaven he stands, no tongue can bid me thence depart. No tongue can bid me thence depart. Behold him there, the risen Lamb, my perfect spotless righteousness, the great unchangeable I am, the King of glory and of grace. No one with him I cannot die, my soul is purchased by his blood, my life is hid with Christ on high, with Christ my Savior and my God, with Christ my Savior and my God. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away, to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away, I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. I'll fly away,
should be released in the morning if everything goes well. That's all the info I have. No follow-up questions. Okay, Landon has given me a blank check to talk about pretty much anything that I wanted to. And then in the discussion I had with him, he said, why don't you talk about idolatry again? So that's what we're going to do. This is going to be a part 2 of the part 1 that I did at the end of my class last quarter. And I'll just do a quick run through of that just for those who don't remember. We're going to see this map again, but we're going to talk about the gods right here. And then most of tonight, we're going to talk about the gods over here. And I'll give a more explanation for that. We talked about the god El, Canaanite god El. He is the over-god. He is the high god. He is the supreme god. In the scriptures, frequently El is associated with Yahweh. We see that a lot, like the name El Shaddai in Genesis. That's that archaic big god name. Not to say that the Canaanite god El is Yahweh, but we see these associations. If you're trying to describe how big he is, El is a pretty good one. Asherah, wife of God, prime consort. She is all over the Old Testament. All over the place. Very popular amongst women especially, but men as well. We talked about Baal being Lord. He is high god. He is a weather god. Frequently he functions in their stories as king of gods. Chemosh, god of Moab. We see him come into play a couple of times in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. And then Moloch. We talked about Moloch. Possibly a unique god. However, much of the archaeology, it's more of a system of sacrifice. We don't see him described as a god. We see it more as we did the sacrifice according to Moloch. And so it may be a type of sacrifice more than a god itself, as far as we know. We talked about the Baal cycle as well. The Baal cycle was the Canaanite method of reasoning why there is a dry season and a rain season. The great war between the god Baal and the god of the sea Yam. And then Baal and Mot, the god of death. We talked about that last time, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it because this is what I want to talk about today. So we're moving in our classes in this quarter and in next quarter. We're in 1 Kings and then 2 Kings. Mesopotamian gods are going to be the big ones from this point forward. The idolatry that you see in the Old Testament in 1 Kings and in 2 Kings is going to increasingly become Assyrian, and then it's going to become Babylonian towards the end of 2 Kings. And that's why I want to spend a little time talking about it, because this is what the Jews had to deal with. This is what the Jews were sacrificing God for, these gods. And I'm not going to belabor it. They have a pantheon as large as Greek mythology, and I can say a lot of Babylonian words at you, but they're not going to mean a whole lot. So we're going to look at 3 really big gods of Assyria and Babylon that are heavily influencing in the scriptures. They're either referenced in the scriptures or they are very popular according to archaeology. We found a lot of records of them in Judah especially, but Israel as well. These gods start coming in during Omri's reign in the northern nation, and probably during Manasseh's reign, especially in the southern nation of Judah. Omri, we know, had a very popular reign when we talk about it politically. He made a lot of inroads with both Egypt and Assyria, a lot of alliances there. He's mentioned in a lot of Assyrian writings, the discussion of Omri, so much so that Assyria, after Omri reigns, will refer to the northern nation of Israel as the land of Omri. That's how they call it from that point forward. He very much was associated there. And so we see those Assyrian gods start coming into the northern nation during his reign. Manasseh, being in Judah, is probably when the Assyrian gods get firmly established in Judah as well. During his reign, a lot of changes happen to the temple. Idolatry is brought into the temple. Manasseh makes a lot of arrangements as well with Assyria, becoming very much buddy-buddy. He's mentioned in several of their records as giving a tribute to them and having this free exchange between the nations. Probably Josiah tried to clean it up, but once it's there, it's there. And then after the death of Josiah, Babylon is really, they're just it. Babylon is everywhere. Babylon is all over the place, and so the Babylonian god ideas come in. When they go off into captivity, Judah does, they go off into Babylon, and so they're going to be faced with these Babylonian gods and stories as well. Everywhere they go is a story of a god that did something right here, and it's all going to be very new to them. And many of the Jews are going to fall into that and fall away from the Lord as a result of it. So that's kind of some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. I just wanted to give you a reason why we're talking about these things. This is the map we started at the beginning. The gods we're going to be looking at are primarily from this southern region, Akkad and Sumar. Up in the north up here, Ashur becomes Assyria. We're going to reference Assyria as well, Ashur. But that's what we're talking about, Israel being this little one over here. So, if we get a little closer, this is Mesopotamia. This is where we're pretty sure a lot of these ancient city-states are located. Some of them that are important are down here in the bottom. We have Babylon. So you can get that idea in your mind. Babylon, incredibly important to history, both First Kingdom and then the Neo-Babylonians, which is where the Bible really comes in. Uruk is another one that is incredibly important. We're going to talk about Uruk when we discuss the goddess Ishtar, because that is her home. She lives in Uruk. Her myths talk about she leaves Uruk to go do things. So that is very much her home. We can think of like Athena with Athens would be a great correlation there, that Athena lives in Athens, is focused on Athens, but has influence elsewhere, but that's her hometown. So Uruk, incredibly important as well. We're also later on going to talk about a mountain up in this region called Nimush. Nimush is where the Babylonians believed Noah's Ark landed, compared with Ararat, which is up in that region. So we're still talking about the same mountains. It's all one big mountain range. But there is a difference there. So we're going to be referencing that later on as well. Just want you to kind of see some of these things before we get started. You can see some of the towns like Ishtar. Ishtar being that goddess I mentioned a moment ago who lives down in Uruk. So we can see her name appearing in quite a few places. Just if you're interested, Kadesh is over here. Kadesh is where Pharaoh Necho was going to fight with the Babylonians when he kills Josiah. So just make that little connection to 2 Kings. Okay, let's talk about Marduk. Marduk is the god of Babylon, prime god of Babylon. Obviously, they have several, but he is really associated heavily in Babylon. He is the controller of the world. He is the supreme god. He is all high. He is above everyone. But he is not the originating god. He is not the one from which gods come. Instead, he is a lower level of god. He is associated with Jupiter. In Greece, we would call him Zeus. And in Rome, we would call him Jupiter. It's almost the same kinds of stories. You have the over-gods create a lower level of gods who then have Marduk. And Marduk then in turn kills a whole bunch of the older ones and then becomes the supreme god. We're going to look at that creation myth here in just a little while. Marduk is shown here with Tiamat. That's Tiamat. Tiamat is chaos herself, the great dragon at the beginning of the world. From whose body Marduk will make the world, and so frequently associated between the two of them. We can see some references to him in Scripture. The name Mordecai is a form of the name Marduk, very similar to some of the other names in the Old Testament, where a Jew gets a name given to him by Babylonians or by Persians or something of that kind, and that name, or you think Joseph in Egypt, that name references a god. Mordecai is that way, Marduk of Marduk. We can also look in another passage. Take a look in Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 50. And we'll look at verse 2. So in verse 1, the word of the Lord spoke, the word that the Lord spoke concerning Babylon, concerning the land of the Chaldeans by Jeremiah the prophet. He said, "Declare among the nations and proclaim, set up a banner and proclaim, conceal it not, and say, Babylon is taken. Bel is put to shame, Merodach is dismayed, her images are put to shame, her idols are dismayed." So that Merodach, the ESV words it that way, that is Marduk that they're talking about there. He's also referencing with this prophecy the idea of her images put to shame and her idols being dismayed. Babylon has a long history of the statue of Marduk being stolen. Several times foreign nations come in, they capture Marduk and take him away to a foreign land. And that's that reference once again here, this idea that again, that which makes you great will be taken from you and you will be put to shame. I will remove your gods from among you, God is saying to them, referencing something that they would have been incredibly familiar with. King Cyrus of Persia, you may recognize his name up there. This is one of his writings when he is talking about, I've taken over Babylon and I'm going to be sending everybody back home. One of the records we have, he credits Marduk with this. He says, "Marduk, the great lord, established as his fate for me a magnanimous heart of one who loves Babylon, and I daily attend to his worship. I returned the images of the gods who had resided there in Babylon to their places. I let them dwell in eternal abodes. I gathered all their inhabitants and returned to them their dwelling." He does this with a lot of gods, so don't get real excited about his piety towards Marduk. He does it with almost every god that Babylon took over. And so even we see references to, I have restored the Lord God Almighty to Jerusalem. I have returned all of the holy implements which his servant Solomon had made. It's the same point. It's the same politics, making himself look good to each of these nations. And he does, in fact, return the statue of Marduk that had been taken out of Babylon. All right. So, any questions on Marduk? I use him as my example because he is the Zeus, he is the Jupiter, he is the prime supreme god. You've got a whole host of ones underneath him, a lot of them. The river has a god, the land has a god, the winds are gods. I mean, so the pantheon continues even beyond that. But he's a pretty good stand-in for understanding the Babylonian gods. He is warlike. All of his myths, he is the winner. He is the greatest. He is the awesomest. He is the one that everybody turns to when they have no hope. You go to Marduk. Marduk can do it. And so you can see Babylon pride there. You can even see in Daniel where Nebuchadnezzar says, look at this city which I have made with my power and how awesome I am. You can see the Marduk story coming out in Nebuchadnezzar. That mindset of this is who I am Marduk on earth. Ishtar is another one. She's also called Inanna. She is probably more important historically than Marduk is. Marduk is very localized. He is a Babylonian god, whereas Inanna, she becomes global. She is all over the place. When we get into Greek mythology, probably Aphrodite is probably your closest, but she probably inspires a lot more than that. She is referred in Assyrian and Babylonian records as Queen of Heaven. She is the goddess of love, of war, and of fertility. One of the Babylonian prayers that we have that is said to her is, may my fireplace, somber and smoking, lighten up again. May my extinguished torch take flame. May my scattered clan come together. And this is prayed to Ishtar, Inanna, rather than any other gods, because she is the one that can make that which is dead alive again. She's mentioned in several passages. We're going to stay in Jeremiah. Take a look we'll go to chapter 44 since we're not that far from it. We looked at these passages with the Asherah. They may also reference Ishtar and Inanna worship. There is some correlation between Asherah and Ishtar. Not a lot, but there is some. Many believe that they're considered to be separate entities in the pantheons of their day. Jeremiah 44 and in verse 19, the women said, when we made offerings to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings to her, was it without our husband's approval that we made cakes for her, bearing her image, and poured out drink offerings to her? We have found the molds that were utilized in Ishtar worship, and it is a shapely woman that they baked the bread into the shape of. Large hips, large breasts, and they baked bread to look like that. It was used in the worship. So we've got that. It's all over the place. You can find those molds all over the Middle East because her worship is incredibly popular, and she is all over, everywhere. Jeremiah 7, same point. Notice again, we're using Jeremiah a lot. Jeremiah is deeply concerned with Babylon, being alive during the destruction of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 7 and verse 18, it's almost the same kind of idea. The children gather wood, the fathers kindle fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. They pour out drink offerings to other gods to provoke me to anger. I like this one because it shows it's a family affair. The children go and get the wood. The husband makes the fire. The wife is making the dough. This is the whole family coming together to ensure that the Queen of Heaven is pleased with them. So I want to spend a little time on Ishtar because I do think she's important. But some of the myths about Ishtar will be very familiar to you. You're going to notice themes from early Genesis in there as people are trying to take what happened and apply it to the gods of their land. One of them that I want to look at is called Inanna and the Hulupu tree. Let me get to my notes. So Inanna, interestingly, she can be described as a young, beautiful, naive, and innocent woman. She is also seen as an old, wise, and powerful woman. This gives her incredible range. Marduk is a man in his prime. He is a warrior. That's what he does. So those are the stories we get of Marduk. But a young, naive, innocent woman, we can have many stories. An old, wise, powerful woman that the gods are afraid of, we can have many stories. She has multiple facets to her, which again really emphasizes the popularity and why the Jews latch on to her. She's a very interesting figure. So, Inanna and the Hulub tree, she finds this tree by the Euphrates. She falls in love with it, but the tree is quite young at that time. She takes the tree and she brings it back to her cave where she is living. She plants the tree and she says, when the tree is large enough, I will make a throne out of this tree. But while the tree is growing, a serpent comes and dwells in its branches. A demon, a monster comes and dwells in the branches. And this female personification of evil comes and dwells among the branches. And she can no longer go to this tree. So she cries out outside of her cave, and a passing warrior, Gilgamesh, you'll recognize his name, especially if I have time, we'll read some of the Epic of Gilgamesh. He comes along and he kills that serpent. And he takes that tree and he turns it into a bed and a throne and gives it to her. And so you can look at these themes. What Bible stories do you hear in this story? Adam and Eve. A woman finds a tree, takes the tree. And when they use the tree, what do they learn? They learn how to be powerful and dominant. And they learn sex. We're going to have a story in a moment about sex with Inanna. And you'll see the early Genesis themes as well. So we look at Inanna and Utu. Utu is her brother. Inanna in this one is a very young woman, very attractive, very naive, just innocent of the ways of life. And so she comes to Utu and she says, I don't understand the ways of life. Help me understand. And he sends her to the underworld, to the place of darkness where death resides. And while there, she finds this tree. and she eats of the fruit of the tree, and immediately is filled with the knowledge of sex and sexual intercourse and how to use that. And so she comes and she gives that gift to the world. What does that sound like? That's Adam and Eve. A woman came, ate of the tree, and now we know we're naked. That's knowledge of sex right there. But again, who is it credited to? It's credited to the Queen of Heaven. So if you've been taught your whole life of the story of Adam and Eve, and then you go to Babylon, and this guy says, I can tell you it wasn't Eve, it was Ishtar. And let me tell you how she did it. Some Jews fall away because the stories are both different and familiar. They feel betrayed by their own God, who allowed themselves to be destroyed, and they're looking for something new. We can look at Inanna prefers the farmer. I like this one. This one is very interesting. So Inanna is a young woman, and she needs to get married. And she meets this farmer. She falls in love with the farmer. He is fantastic, but he has a hard life. He works very hard and is poor. But then she's introduced to a shepherd. And this shepherd, he is something else. His flocks are fantastic. He doesn't work very hard, and he is wealthy and can give her a great many things. But she really likes her farmer. But she listens to her family and she listens to her friends, and they all say, look, you're a woman. You need to go where your best chance of life is. And so she goes and she marries the shepherd. What story does that remind you of from early Genesis? Of a shepherd and a farmer competing for the attention of a god. Cain and Abel. That's Cain and Abel right there. And who triumphs? Who does the God prefer in the story of Cain and Abel? He prefers the shepherd. He prefers Abel. So we can see how these people heard these stories, and this is what they did with them. They created, utilizing their own mythology, the same story. But they used the Queen of Heaven. She is all over the place in these ancient stories and given credit for so many of those early things that we read about in Genesis. Any questions on Ishtar? Yes?
Made reference to it that they had read these stories or heard these stories, and that's how they came up with. And I was wondering, did they take certain people that they knew about their characteristics and made a composite god, for each area?
It's possible.
So we can take a look at, say, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The oldest records we've got is about 1800 BC, which is about Abraham's day, and it was called an old story then. So probably even older. The Epic of Gilgamesh includes a story, we're going to read in a little bit if I have time, where Gilgamesh talks to Noah. And Noah is alive while Gilgamesh can do this. That's how old they are, is that these people heard these stories from Noah himself. And then as they scattered, they began retelling them and retelling them and retelling them and retelling them. And as their own gods developed, they created them in their image. Yeah. Any others on Inanna? Last one I want to talk about is Ashur. Ashur is the supreme god of Assyria. Not nearly as much is known about Ashur. He doesn't have great mythology stories about him. He is literally the god of that nation. Rules over the city of Ashur in Assyria. Ultimately moved to Nineveh and several other cities as well throughout his history, frequently symbolized by a bull, incredibly common in the ancient world. But what's most important about him is he is expansionistic. All of the stories and the things that are written about him is that he is an ambitious god who wants more and more and more territory. Therefore, Assyria and the kings of Assyria, to be pleasing to their god, have to be conquering and conquering and conquering. And if they don't, Ashur will be upset with them. Ashur is very unforgiving. He is not a compassionate God. He is not a loving God. He is a God who loves violence, and cruelty. That's what we see out of the Assyrians. They're well known historically for violence and cruelty. Even though they don't do much different than the Babylonians or the Persians do, they are known for violence and cruelty, even though everybody did it. And a lot of that is this concept of Asher, this god who pushes them to do these things. Okay, I want to spend a little time talking about opening of the mouth. Opening of the mouth is a ceremony that is all over the Middle East. The most clear and well-known ones, records of it, found in Egypt. It's 21 or 25 steps long, but we can find references to it all over the Middle East. This is how you make an idol alive. And that's one of the things we're going to see in just a moment when we read those 4 passages in the scriptures, that God is going to attack. Can a block of wood really be alive? And so they do things and it's broken into 3 main steps, whether you're looking at Assyria, Babylon, Persia, you're looking at Egypt, no matter what it is. There are 3 main steps: purification, vivification, and enthronement. They all start with a specific way of gathering the materials. The materials, it's a lengthy process, have to be purified, have to be made holy. The craftsmen have to be made holy as well. They go through the process of making the image. The image is then usually taken to a pure creation location, meaning not in the temple. More than likely, it's by a river. You're talking Egypt, you're talking the Nile, you're talking Assyria and Babylon, Tigris and the Euphrates. That's what you're doing. You're taking them to a natural place. There you have a huge number of rituals and sacrifices that are done, including dunking the idol into the water, utilizing a special instrument to literally open up the mouth of this idol to make a gaping hole, so that now the idol is able to speak and is able to eat and able to breathe. You are literally making it come to life, utilizing this process. Then there's the process of feeding it. As soon as it comes up out of the water, opened up its mouth, you have to start feeding the idol, and they would shove food into the mouth of the idol so that the god begins to eat. They would put clothing upon it, anoint it, and then you have the enthronement. You bring it back with pomp and circumstance. You bring it to the location that it's going to be living. Offerings and incantations are spoken here. Now the idol is considered alive. It is the god. It is not a representation of the god. It is the god. Typically, for a nation, this type of ceremony is only done once or twice per idol because they can't live in multiple locations. So when we talked a little bit ago about Marduk being stolen from Babylon, that's literally what happened. Marduk's images are all over Babylon. Small ones, big ones. But Marduk is a specific idol, a specific god, and they stole him. And so this is idolatry. It is literally believing that your God is alive and you can go and you can see him and you can talk to him and you can touch him. The story, apocryphal story, Bel and the Dragon, takes place during the days of Daniel, and Daniel proves at that time that the god Bel is not alive. They say to Daniel, obviously he's alive. We put food out in the evenings. In the morning, all of the food is gone. Daniel says, I can prove it, and he scatters ash all over the ground. And in the morning, you can see the footprints of the priests who came to remove the food to make it look like Bel actually ate the food, and therefore proving an idol is not really alive. That's that apocryphal book, Bel and the Dragon, if you want to read that. So just kind of how this interaction happens. Let's look at some passages, because the Bible talks about this opening of the mouth very frequently. In Deuteronomy 4 is one of the earliest references to it, Deuteronomy 4:28. He says, and there you will serve gods of wood and stone, the work of human hands that neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. Now notice, it's not just you will have images of these gods. But it's making a big deal about these gods are supposed to be functional. They're supposed to have internal organs. They're supposed to be able to consume and have waste. And so that's what God is talking about in Deuteronomy. That you're searching and you're going after these gods, but these gods are not alive. Having just come out of Egypt, they would be familiar with opening of the mouth ceremonies. They would know what this is like and how people viewed those specific idols, believing them to be functional. Another one, Psalm 135. Psalm 135, verse 15. The idols of the nations are silver and gold, the work of human hands. They have mouths but do not speak. They have eyes but do not see. They have ears but do not hear, nor is there any breath in their mouths. Those who make them become like them, so do all who trust in them. Notice again the emphasis on the mouth. Eating, speaking, breathing, because that is what was alive with these opening of the mouth ceremonies. It also references, if you look at, I think it's the third line under purification, during the process of opening of the mouth, they would ceremoniously bind the hands of the craftsman, and they would come with a wooden sword and chop off the hands of the craftsman, while the craftsmen cry out, "I didn't make it, it wasn't me. It just appeared." Does that sound familiar? Who does that remind you of? Aaron. That's the same words. We put it in and out came a calf. What is he familiar with? He's very familiar with how an idol becomes alive. Habakkuk. There we go. Habakkuk 2:19. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Notice again that difference of, is it alive? Can it breathe? Can it function? Can it consume? No, it can't. It was made by human hands. In Jeremiah 10. So Jeremiah 10, verse 3. For the customs of the peoples are vanity. A tree from the forest is cut down and worked with an axe by the hands of a craftsman. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nails so that it cannot move. Their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field. They cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Neither is it in them to do good. They're nothing, is what the word of the Lord is saying here. And I love his image. They go out, they find the tree, they cut it down, they bring it in, they shape it into its thing, they put nails in it so it can't fall over. It's nothing. It can't do evil, it can't do good, it can't do at all. And so very much attacking this concept of the opening of the mouth ceremony that all of them would have been very familiar with. Any questions on that? Okay.
Position in their mind that this is a life. When they know what life is
They have faith.
Well,
That's how.
Well, do any of these gods actually answer their prayers? Can they really actually point to things that the
Sure.
gods have?
If I prayed to Baal that he would
Cause it to rain, and tomorrow it rains, my prayer has been answered. If I want to have victory in battle and I cry out to Marduk and then I don't die in battle, Marduk is with me. Read the Iliad. The gods are all over the place in the Iliad. How mankind fights while the gods themselves are clashing. And man is just a physical representation of what the gods decided.
Made the idol, and then it says that they declare that it was made by the god. So, is there a ruling class that actually knows the scam or the hustle, and then they're going along with it because they realize it gives them power or gives them money, or is there a group of people that realize that it's a hustle, and then the rest of the people are ignorant and they go along with it?
In all societies, you're going to have agnostics and you're going to have atheists. Some of them are going to utilize religion in order to get ahead. It's been true as long as there's been humanity. But as far as, is there a dedicated ruling class? That's hard to say. In Egypt, Pharaoh is considered the son of Ra, and many of them seem like they believed it, that they really were God on earth, and when they die, they will ascend and be God in reality. They seem to believe it. Roman emperors believed it, or at the very least, they.
People behind the kings of Babylon, maybe they believed there was a god or there was a Marduk or whoever, but there were some people that knew that this was not.
There's always going to be some people, yeah. Yeah.
But they kept quiet because they were given whatever.
Yeah. But if this is, again, all you know, you need to explain the world. How is it that this person can cry out to this god or goddess and something actually happened? Well, then that is evidence. Any other thoughts?
Was upset because their livelihood would be taken away, and he was in it for monetary gain.
Yeah. Well, Paul says even some people will preach just for monetary gain. Yeah. So we're not immune to it either. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Infallible. Yeah. And I don't know if he really believes it or not, but everything he says seems like he does. It would be very hard for me to believe it, but that's because of what I know. If you haven't been told what you and I have been told, it would probably be easier to believe.
You have to know who you are. I mean, how many popes have there been, for one thing? How can they all be? And at the end of the day, unless the man's nuts, who knows who what is?
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of the stories. We're going to talk about two creation myths, one from Sumer and one from Babylon. And then as long as I got time, I'm going to read about Gilgamesh talking to Noah. So the first one I want to talk about is the Atrahasis. I think I got to go back in my notes. Atrahasis is the name of a hero of the Sumerian Empire. He means extremely wise. That's what his name means. So he'll factor in a little bit towards the end. And you'll again, when you hear these stories, you can tell that they were told what we read in Scripture and then moved away from it because the roots are going to still be there. So to the Sumerians, to explain how these things came to be, you start off with Enlil, who is god of earth, and he assigns some lesser gods called Dingirs to work the land, that it's their responsibility to go out and to labor, make sure the rivers are kept up and the canals are kept up. And after some time, the Dingirs don't like that. They don't want to work. They look at the higher level of gods that they just relax and do nothing, and they want that. And so Enki comes along, the kind and wise counselor of the gods. He comes along and he says, look, let's not really mess with the Dingirs, give them what they want. Let's make some humans, and they can do that work for us. And that'll be their whole purpose. So he comes to the mother goddess, Mami, M-A-M-I, and speaks to her, and she then mingles with clay and the flesh and the blood of wisdom, the god of wisdom, and shoves it into the ground in this kind of womb. 10 months later, pop comes out humans. And now it is their responsibility to tend the land and work the fields and bring forth harvests. What roots can you hear in that story? What are they trying to explain? And what stories do we have from Genesis that talk about why these things are so? Adam created from dust of the earth. They're created from clay. And a part of the God, flesh and blood of the God. What does it say we are? Clay and what? The breath of God. So we still have that mingling. You can still see the two that are going on there. What else did you hear? Why are we on earth? To do God's work. We're here to tend the fields, to work and labor. That's Genesis. That's Genesis 2, Genesis 3. God made man and put him in the garden to tend it. Then we have the great fall, and now it's hard work. Notice the gods don't want to do hard work. We made humans to do hard work. So it's the same root. They understood, but then they changed it to fit their own pantheon. Some time passes, and this is where it moves into the flood account in Sumer. And Enlil, god of the earth, says we've got a problem. There are too many humans. So he first decides every 1,200 years I'm just going to do a big plague. I'm going to kill a whole bunch of them. That's not really working very well. And so he finally decides, look, I got to get rid of them. And so he decides to flood the world. Well, Enki, the kind god, hears this, and he comes to Atrahasis, and he speaks to him through a reed wall so that he doesn't see him. And he tells him that Enlil is going to destroy them by a flood. He tells him, you need to tear down your house and build a large boat. And in that boat, you need to make sure that you have an upper and a lower deck, and you need to make sure that you seal it with pitch. Then you need to get onto it with your family and all animals, representations of all the earth. Seal the door so that you can survive the flood. The flood then happens. It rains for 6 days. On the 7th day, the flood ends and the boat comes to rest. Atrahasis comes out, sacrifices to the gods. Enlil is furious that humans have survived, but ultimately is pacified by Enki. Can you hear the flood? I mean, you got a lot of details. Upper and lower deck here, sealed with pitch. You need to build a boat. I mean, it's all over the place. Because where did they hear it from? Probably Noah told the story. Noah's alive a very long time. Much longer in comparison to the people who come after him. And they heard this story of this great man. In this case, Atrahasis. Okay, let's talk about the Enuma Elise. The Enuma Elise is Babylonian, and put it very briefly, in the beginning is Apsu and Tiamat, water and chaos. And from these two gods, they begin to birth some of the other gods, the greater gods. Those gods then begin to have children of their own, and it gets really loud and noisy. So much so that Tiamat, chaos herself, she can't handle it. And she says, we just got to do something. So Apsu comes up with the plan to kill all the gods. Well, that's learned. And the younger gods lull him to sleep. And while he's asleep, the god of rivers comes and kills him. Think about that. The god of rivers kills the god of water. Then they say, we need to do something about Tiamat. She is raging against everyone. She has amassed for herself a monstrous army and wants to come and kill us. So they cry out for Marduk. And Marduk is brought to the forefront. And Marduk says, I'll do it, but only if you make me supreme god. Then they outfit him. They agree to this. He sits on his throne, and then he goes and slays Tiamat. From Tiamat, He splits her in two, creating the sky and the earth. He then says, we need people to live on the earth. I will kill myself, and from my blood will come forth these people. And they don't like that. They don't want Marduk to die. So instead, they take the general of Tiamat's army, kill him instead, and out comes humanity. What similarities, what roots did you hear? It's creation again. In the beginning was God. What was the earth like in Genesis 1? Without form and void. And God moved across the face of the what? The deep, the waters. In the beginning is Apsu and Tiamat, chaos and water. They've heard these stories. They've heard of how God made the world. And then they used their own names. And those names became gods themselves. And again, we can see the rise of Marduk in that story. That's why I talked about him. Any questions on these myths? Okay, the last thing I want to do is talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the middle of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is trying to understand life, trying to understand death, and he's very afraid of dying. And so he leaves his home, and he sails across the ocean of death to try to find a man named Utanapishti the Distant. Utanapishti is eternal, long living. And he tells a story, and I want to highlight some of the verses from the epic. It's one of the most complete stories and oldest stories we have from archaeological records. He says, I want to tell you some things. He says, this is what happened to me. Utanapishti says, the town of Shurupak, a city well known to you, which stands on the bank of the river Euphrates. The city was old. The gods were once in it when the great gods decided to send down the deluge. Their father Anu swore an oath, their counselor, the hero Enlil as well. And they said, we will destroy humanity. But princely Ea, the god of rivers, comes and says to Utanapishti, he says, you need to go, O man of Shurupak, son of Ubar-Tutu. Demolish your house, build a boat, abandon wealth, seek survival, spurn property, save life. Take on board the boat all living things seed. The boat you will build, her dimensions will all be equal, her length and breadth shall be the same. Cover her with a roof. And I understood and I did these things. And he tears down, he goes on, he tears down his home. He hires workmen from all over the place to build a boat where his house once stood. The young men are bringing the supplies. The old men are bearing ropes. This is a full town event, Utanapishti says. And we did it in a week. It's very quick in the Babylonian records. 6 decks I gave her, divided her into 7. 9 compartments, I divided her interior. I struck the bilge plugs in her middle. I saw to the punting poles, put in the tackle. I put pitch, 3 myriad measures of pitch all over the place. And then I butchered oxen for my workmen so they could celebrate like it was New Year. But at sunrise, I looked and I saw that the time that the sun god had appointed was here. In the morning, he will send you a shower of bread cakes. In the evening, a torrent of wheat. Go into the boat and seal your hatch. That time had now come. In the morning, he will send you a shower of bread cakes. In the evening, a torrent of wheat. I examined, I looked at the weather. I gave my home, my palace, to the man who made my ship, Puzur and Lil. At the very first glimmer of brightening dawn, there arose in the horizon a dark cloud of black. Bellowing within it was Adad the storm god. He pours out water for several more stanzas here. For a day, the gale winds flattened the country. Quickly they blew, and then came the deluge like a battle. The cataclysm passed over the people. One man could not discern another, nor could people be recognized amid the destructions. Even the gods took fright at the deluge. They left and went up to heaven of Anu. Lying like dogs curled up in the open, the goddess cried out like a woman in childbirth. Belet Eli wailed, whose voice is so sweet, the olden times have turned to clay. Because I spoke evil in the God's assembly. How could I speak evil in the God's assembly and declare a war to destroy my people? It is I who gives birth. These people are mine, and now like fish, they fill the ocean. The gods weep over this destruction. But on the seventh day, the deluge ends. The ocean grows calm, and the tempest grows still. I looked at the weather, and it was quiet. It was still. The flood plain, like the roof of a house. I opened a vent, and sunlight fell on my cheeks. And on the mountain of Nimush, the boat ran aground. Mount Nimush held the boat fast, allowing no motion. For 1 day, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it had no motion. On the seventh day, I brought out a dove, and it went, but found nowhere to land, so it came back. I brought out a swallow the next day, and it went, but found nowhere to land and came back. I brought out a raven, and it went and did not come back to me. So I left the boat and offered sacrifices to the four winds. And the gods came and spoke to me. And he goes on from there. What did you hear? It's Noah's story. The Bible presents it in a very clear picture, but that's what it is. He builds a boat, it's got compartments, he covers it in pitch. He's commanded by the gods to do this. He is commanded to bring animals into it. They are in it for a while. There's fear, there's destruction of the world. Can you hear in this tale the anguish of Noah as he hears the screams and knows what's going on right outside his walls? The anguish of that poem. And then it ends with Utanapishti talking to the gods, and the gods say, you will live forever. And Noah lives a very long time. And so people coming to him hundreds of years after the flood would view him that way, as this immortal being who has no end. Will he ever die? The rest of us are dying. So you can see this epic probably has its roots very quickly after the flood. Very soon afterwards, in the children, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren of Noah and his family. Learning these tales, but then applying them to other gods. Thank you for your attention. Hope it was interesting. I hope I did land in justice and did what he wanted. He'll be back next week.
In heavenly honor we'll enter the land. The battle belongs to the Lord. No weapon that's fashioned against us will stand. The battle belongs to the Lord. And we sing glory, honor, power and strength to the Lord. We sing glory, honor, power and strength to the Lord. When the power of darkness comes in like a flood, the battle belongs to the Lord. He's raised up a standard, the power of